Okay, Freundlich in Chanukah, everyone. So glad to be able to learn together again Parshas Vayeishev. Somebody had asked me earlier that maybe the first night of Chanukah we shouldn't have the Shiur. And I said to myself, there's no way. Like, I know that none of you are having parties tonight. So if we're not having parties, Chanukah is a time for learning. Chanukah is a time for spiritual growth. For sure, we're going to have the Shiur tonight. Now, really, I should have prepared something from Rosh Yeshiva on Chanukah. He has a lot of Torah on Chanukah, but we have to finish up. This is the third of our three installments on the approach that we've been addressing between the Avodas Pnim and the Avodas Chutz, the inner Avodah, the outer Avodah. We've been developing it over the last couple of weeks, and tonight we're going to conclude it in the most magnificent way. So I'm very excited to do that with you, and let us begin. So the centerpiece of our Parsha this week of Vayeishev is the sale of Yosef. Really one of the most complicated episodes in the Torah to understand. The Ramban himself mentions in his commentary a number of times that it was just a gzeir. It's a decree from heaven that Yosef needs to be down in Mitzrayim, and however it was going to happen, it was going to happen. And he works through a lot of the different areas. It's a complicated issue why the brothers were so full of jealousy and hatred. Clearly, the Torah tells us some information. We know that Yaakov favors Yosef. The Torah says explicitly, Vayeishev Yaakov es Yosef mikol banav. He loved him more. He gave him a ksonis pasim. He gave him a special coat. So he actually showed or demonstrated his love to Yosef more. Then we have all of the dreams that Yosef shares. So there's a lot of information, and putting it all together is complicated. What I'd like to look at is one fascinating medrash, absolutely perplexing, on the element of the sale. And I believe that when we get to the end of understanding a little bit, hopefully, of this medrash, we'll really tie together many of the themes that we've been speaking about. Pasuk begins, let's start with the actual sale of Yosef. It's in source number 1 in the sheet in front of you. Vayomer Yehuda el Echal. Let's remember, it's Yehuda speaking to the brothers here at the pit, and he says, Ma botza ki naharoges achinu. What is the gain for what's the benefit to us to actually kill our brother, to cover up his blood? Now this is already, this is the second half of the story. The brothers already tried to kill him before, and Reuven suggests that they throw him into the pit. Instead of killing him biyadayim actively, let's just throw him into the pit. They do, and then they sit down to eat, and then Yehuda comes up with his second plan and says, why should we let him die there? What do we gain? Let's sell him to the Yishmaelim v'yadeinu al tihibo, and let not our hands be physically upon him. After all, ki achinu b'sareinuhu. He is our brother. V'yishmu'u echav. And the brothers listen to Yehuda's suggestion. Yehuda says, why should we do this? They listen. So these anashim, these midyanim, they come. We're leaving aside whether al Yishmaelim, midyanim. We're leaving that point aside. They pull him out, and you'll choose which phrase is extraneous in the coming pasuk. They sold Yosef to the Yishmaelim for 20 pieces of silver, Yosef Mitzrayim. And that's how Yosef ends up being brought down to Mitzrayim. Which piece of information is totally extraneous and irrelevant to us? The sale price. The Torah tells us it was Esrim Kasef, 20 pieces of silver. Let me ask you a question. The relevant piece of information here is that the brothers sold Yosef. Let's say they got a good deal. Oh, then it makes sense. They got a good deal for him. Okay. Well, who cares how much money they made off of that? It's an irrelevant piece of information. All we care is that they sold him. But the Torah tells us the sale price. Not only does the Torah tell us the sale price, the Medrash in the Pirkei Rebbe Elazar in source number 2 says 20 pieces of silver. That's interesting. How many brothers sold him? There were 10 brothers that were involved in the sale. Yosef's younger brother Binyamin was not. 10 brothers were. Says the Medrash, basing itself on a pasuk in Amos, the Navi Amos. Ko Amar Hashem. The Navi, now again, it's talking years later, but he says, so says Hashem, Ashlosha Pishei Yisrael. I'm willing to forgive 3 sins amongst the Jewish people. Ve'al arba'a lo ashiver. But on 4, no. I think Gemara talks about what he's referring to specifically, but in our reference, the pasuk then concludes, Al michram bakesef tzadik ve'evyon, that you sold for money a righteous person, a tzadik ve'evyon, and a poor person, ba'avor na'alayim, for shoes, that you sold a tzaddik for shoes. The Navi Amos yells at the Jewish people, Hashem can't forgive that. And the Medrash picks up, what's Amos talking about? You sold a tzaddik for shoes? That's connected to this sale of when the brothers picked up their 20 pieces of silver, they bought shoes. Umachru, the Medrash says, Umachru soli Yishmaelim b'esrim kasef. They sold them for 20 pieces of silver. V'kol echad ve'echad natol shnei ksafim. Everybody got 2 pieces of silver. Liknos na'alayim l'ragleihem, to buy shoes for their feet. Zok the Medrash. This requires an understanding. Not only is it perplexing that the Torah tells us how much money they sold them for, and the Medrash connects it to a pasuk in Amos, they bought shoes? Why is it relevant? And if the Medrash is telling us, Chazal, see, you need to know what they bought with their money. They bought shoes. Somehow that's going to be a significant aspect over here. Now, if this is vaguely familiar, you might remember from Yom Kippur, in the Machzor, when we begin the section of the Asara Haruge Malchus, the 10 martyrs, towards the end of Musaf, after we go through what the procedure in the Beis HaMikdash would be, and the sprinkling of the blood, and the karbanos, and everything, we then go through a long series of pages, and part of it is the 10 Haruge Malchut. It's very poetic, and the beginning, I'm not going to read the entire source that I put here, source number 3, but the beginning of the second paragraph describes, now the Asar Haruge Malchus in general, they didn't all live in the same century. So the Machzor, the Python, who put it together, sort of weaves it into a single story of a Roman leader who brings together the leading sages of the Jewish people, because he read in the Chumash a pasuk that says "V'gonev ish u'mecharo," a person who kidnaps a person and then sells him, most should be put to death. The pasuk in the Chumash. So the Python puts together, this is what we read every year Yom Kippur. Gava libo bigdolim. So he gathered together these great leaders. Vitziva limalos paltero na'alayim. I have that in bold. And then the Roman leader commanded to fill his palace with shoes. And he calls together the 10 martyrs. And he says, are you familiar with the pasuk? What should be the law of someone who kidnaps a Jew and sells him? In the beginning of the third paragraph, Haim ka'anulo, and they answered, Umeis haganav hahu, he should be put to death, the thief. Vinam, and then this Roman leader says, Aye avoseichem, what then happened to your forefathers, the 10 brothers, Asher achehem micharuhu, that they sold their brother, leorchas yishmaelim scharuhu, uva avorna alayim nisanu, and they did it for shoes. Every year, Yom Kippur, when we go through the beginning of the Asara Ruge Malchus, the 10 martyrs, we refer to this idea that the 10 brothers sold him for a pair of shoes, that they each should get shoes. And then he says to them, now you need to accept the judgment upon you for in behalf of the 10 brothers, and therefore the 10 martyrs are killed in the payment, so to speak, for the 10 brothers having sold their brother Yosef. And again, the idea is woven in for a pair of shoes, and this we, of course, need to understand. Let's throw in one more medrash in, and then start getting to some an understanding, I hope. In the beginning of this week's Parsha, we have the dreams. The first dream of Yosef is Vayomer Aleihem. He says to his brother, Shim'una hachalom hazeh asher chalamti. Come, he says, listen to this dream that I have dreamt. We were gathering together sheaves, tying together bundles of grain in the midst of the field. Vihine kama alumasi, and my grain, my sheaves stood up. Kama. V'gam nitzav, and remained standing. Vihine tisubenu alumosechem, but yours gathered around. V'tishtachavena la'alumasi. Yours gathered around mine, to Subena, and then bowed down to mine. The Medrash picks up the Medrash on the language of Hine Kama. Mine stood up, which also comes from the word Lekayem, to remain. And the word Tisubena, which means to encircle, Misubin has other meanings like to rot. And the Medrash says, Yosef in effect said to his brothers as follows, Atem koinsim peros, you gather grain, va'ani kones peros, and I gather grain. Shalachem markivim, but whatever you gather from the fields is going to rot. Vishali omdin, but mine will remain. That's a deeper meaning of his dream when he says that my sheaf was in the middle and all of yours gathered around and bowed down, but mine stood, mine remained, and yours not only encircled but rotted. Yosef says, my sheaves from the field are going to remain and yours are going to rot. So starts our shiur tonight with these two midrashim. Number one, that Yosef is sold for a pair of shoes for each one of the brothers, and the idea that Yosef says, mine are going to remain and yours will not. Now, to address this, let's go back over very, very briefly the two ideas that we developed in the previous 2 weeks. Last week, again, was a different topic, but the 2 weeks prior to that. Number one was, how did Esav fool his father Yitzchak? What did Yitzchak think? What was Esav all about, that he wanted to give him a bracha? And there we developed the idea that there are two paths, two types of service of Hashem that a Jew can be on. One is what we call the avodah pnim, the inner avodah, where one is involved directly with dvarim shebikdusha, sanctified entities of learning, davening, whatever it may be, inside, so to speak, the walls of the Beis HaMedrash. And there's a second path of the avodah chutz, that which takes place outside of the walls of the Beis HaMedrash. Somebody's got to be, so to speak, the executive director, to build, to construct, to manage, to be out there in the world and be able to take care of that. And Yitzchak understood, of course, you need these two different things. From the time that Adam was kicked out of Gan Eden, if we would have remained in Gan Eden, there only would have been one form of service of Hashem. But we were exiled from Gan Eden. And once we have to go out into the world, now there developed a partnership. You need somebody to manage the world, and you need somebody to be able to learn inside. The two go together. And Yitzchak, having had twins, and saw that Esav was an ish hasadeh, was a man of the field, and saw that Yaakov was an ish tam yoshev ohalim, he sat and learned, understood there was going to be a partnership. Esav was the man who knew how to manipulate the world, who knew how to manage the world and control. And Yaakov sat and learned that it was going to be a beautiful relationship together. And Esav fooled him by asking how you tithe salt and straw, both of which played into that idea like we discussed. And so that's why Yitzchak wanted to give him the bracha of prosperity. But Esav opted out. Esav doesn't want to be a partner in this endeavor in which he's supporting his brother Yaakov and all that's going on inside the Beis HaMedrash. So Esav opts out. And Rivka understands that. Yaakov understands that. So how does Yaakov get the bracha of prosperity? He becomes Esav, dresses up like him, sneaks in like him, steals the bracha and says, Abba, I can also work in this world. I can also manipulate. I can figure out, I'm going to do it all because my brother Esav is opting out. And we need this bracha of prosperity. Somebody needs to manage. I'm going to do it. And so he sneaks in and takes the bracha. The second stream that we picked up on then the following week is what happens to his wives. So Rachel had been destined to Yaakov and Leah was destined to marry Esav. But when Esav opts out, Leah opts into Yaakov and says, listen, my husband is out, but you need this quality and I'm coming in. And she does so by saying, she sneaks in the middle of the night. Remember, the Medrash says, Yaakov said, how could you do this? I called out the whole night. And she says, I learned from the best. You, so to speak, earned me when you became Esav and you said, I'm going to take that form of avoda, that form of service. You got me too. What should have happened, we learned, is that she should have been the second wife. Yaakov's primary wife was going to be Rachel, but when she was going to be humiliated, Rachel gives her the simanim and says, it's not just enough that I'm going to let you into the marriage. That would have been one step. Not only will I let you in, now that you're going to take over the Esav role, you're going to go first so that you shouldn't be embarrassed. And she's Moser simanim, she gives her the signs. Rosh Yeshiva understood the signs of what it means to be that primary inner avoda wife, so that she shouldn't be embarrassed. And Leah ends up with Reuven the Bechor, Levi, which is Kahuna, Yehuda, which is Malchus, Yisachar, which is Torah. All the primary aspects of Klal Yisrael, the things which we would have thought should have been Rachel's children, they all end up as Leah's children. Rachel ends up with Yosef and Binyamin, and we're going to see now that role is reversed. And her children of Yosef and Binyamin are going to take the role of what we would have assumed should have been the wife of Esav, that outside avodas chutz role are going to be dominated by Yosef and Binyamin. And this, I don't want to call it a conflict, but this tension, so to speak, between Yosef representing the children of Rachel and Yehuda as the Melech representing the children of Leah works its way throughout Jewish history. It's a fascinating, it's very much part of the Hanukkah story, but we're not going to get into that too much tonight. That idea, remember, it's Yehuda who comes up with the idea to sell Yosef. It's Yehuda's idea, and we're going to find this stream of the two different representations. Let's just start, for example, in source number 5. Vayikol nefesh yotzei yerech Yaakov shivim nefesh. As Yaakov, this is in the beginning of Sefer Shmos, when the Torah tells us who came down to Mitzrayim. Yaakov and his family were 70 souls. Yosef hayob in Mitzrayim. And the Torah tells us that Yosef was already there. Rashi asks, what do you mean Yosef was already in Mitzrayim? When you count up to 70, Yosef and his children were counted in the 70. So that when you list in the beginning of Sefer Shmos, all the children, count them up, you get 70. Why does the Torah then need to highlight, and Yosef was already in Mitzrayim? We counted him already. Says Rashi, we didn't know he's in Mitzrayim. We know that the whole end of Sefer Bereshis, Yosef is in Mitzrayim. We're going to learn an element of the tzidkus, the righteousness of Yosef. Who Yosef haroya es tzon aviv, this same Yosef who shepherded the flocks of his father, who Yosef shahaya bin Mitzrayim, is the same Yosef in Mitzrayim, v'nasa melech, and became a king, v'omed b'tzidko, and remained in his righteousness. Again, put this in the context of our discussion. What's the quality, the trait that you need to remain righteous in a Beis HaMedrash? You live in a Beis HaMedrash your whole life. You finish high school, you go and learn, and you never leave. Some of us still have friends who we came with us to after high school. They learned in Yeshiva in Israel. They're still there. Now, that takes a certain trait to be able to do that. How do you manage? But they're in the Beis HaMedrash their whole life. What's the trait of the one who gets exiled out? He's out there by himself, alone on an island, and maintains the same level of righteousness as what he had when he was in his father's home shepherding the flock. The Torah highlights, says Rashi, Yosef had the ability not just to remain a tzaddik in his father's home. Yosef was a tzaddik in Mitzrayim. Not just in Mitzrayim, he was the melech of Mitzrayim. He had every potential influence against him. And Yosef, the same Yosef that was in his father's home, is the same Yosef that remains in Mitzrayim, Omed B'tzidko, to be able to maintain. That is a certain trait. That is Yosef, the son of Rachel, who's now playing the role of being out there in the world, the avodas chutz. That Yosef is the one who has the ability to go out and remain true to who he is. This is why when Yaakov was on his way down, he's afraid. This is now next week's Parsha. After the reunification, Yosef reveals himself to his brothers and he sends for his father Yaakov. The Torah tells us, Vayasa Yisrael v'chol asher lo v'yovo Be'ersheva. Yaakov's on his way down to Mitzrayim. He gets to Be'ersheva, he brings a korban, and he says, Hashem appears to him, Vayomer Elokim Yisrael b'maros. Hashem appears to him and says, Yaakov, Vayomer Hineni. Vayomer Anochi Akel Elokei Avicha, I am the God of your father. Al tira mirdam Mitzrayim. Don't be afraid that you're going down now to Mitzrayim. Ki legoy gadol asam. I'm making you into a great nation. What's Yaakov afraid of? Says the Medrash in source number 7. Shaya Maharer Beliba Vaomer. Yaakov in his heart said, Eicha ezov es eretz avoisai. How can I leave the land of my fathers? This eretz moladati, the land that I was born in. This eretz shchinaso shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'socha, the land that Hashem's presence is in. How can I leave this? Ve'elech el eretz tameya, and I'm going to go to a land of impurity. L'toch avadim b'nei cham, of servants. Be'eretz she'ein yira shamayim beineim. There's no fear of heaven there. How can I leave, so to speak, my Beis HaMedrash, my land of Israel, with the Shechina, Hashem's presence, the holiness? I'm going to go to the land of Tumah, of impurity. How can I do that? What's Hashem's response in the next pasuk? Anochi ereid imcha Mitzrayim. I'm going to go down with you, Hashem says. I'll be with you. Anochi alcha gam alo. I will raise you back up. V'Yosef yoshis yado alei nachar. Yosef will be there, so to speak, to put his hands over your eyes. He will see you through this. What koach, Yaakov, do you need to be able to survive in a foreign land? Who's going to get you through that? Not any of your children that you raised in your home. You know who's going to have the power, the strength to be out there in the land of impurity and guard you and keep you and cover your eyes with his hand as you come to rest at the end of your days? That's going to be your son, Yosef. And Yosef is the one who is, as the Rosh uses it, Solel Esadera, who prepares the way. He's the one whose ability to be out there. he's going to be the first one down to Mitzrayim. He's going to set everything up. He's going to be the one to prepare the land of Goshen. He's going to be the one to provide their sustenance and bring them down. But listen to this amazing thing. Right as Yaakov's on his way down, he's already packed up his bags. He's in Beersheba. The Torah then says, Ve'es Yehu, source number 8, Ve'es Yehuda shalach lefanav el Yosef. On the way down, he sends Yehuda before him. He's already packed up. He sends Yehuda up ahead, lehoros lefanav Goshna, to prepare before him the land of Goshen, vayavo artsa Goshen. And Yehuda gets to Goshen first. What's he sending Yehuda there for? So Rashi quotes Pasha Pshat to get everything set up. And then Rashi says, Umedrush Agada, Lahoros Lefanov. Lahoros is a language of Hora'ah, to teach. Lesakin lo beis Talmud. Yehuda needs to set up the base Medrash, Shemisham Teitzei Hora'ah. Listen to this. Who's setting them up in Mitzrayim? Who's the ability? Who does Hashem say, don't worry? Yosef is there. Who does Yaakov then send to set up the base of Medrash so that when they get there, they're ready to learn? Yehuda. Yehuda, the son of Leah, you go set up the base of Medrash. But who's going to get everything else ready? Who's the first one down there? That's going to be the Koach of Yosef. And this pattern, Yosef comes first and then is going to set everything up, we are going to see. For example, who is going to conquer the land of Israel? That is conquered by Yehoshua. Yehoshua is from Ephraim, from the line of Yosef Binyamin, the children of Rachel. Yehoshua is going to be the one to conquer, the first one in, the one to wage the war and get everything set up. The Mishkan first is going to be where? In Shiloh. Shiloh, it's called Ohel Yosef, in the section belonging to, again, Yosef. That's where the first Mishkan is going to go until its permanent place is ready in Yehuda. Va'alu Moshi'im lahar Zion. The salvation is going to come. Moshi'im, plural, are going to come to redeem the Jewish people. From the plural language that the redeemers are going to come, Chazal learned there are actually going to be two Mashiachs. Mashiach ben Yosef, followed by Mashiach ben David. Mashiach ben Yosef is going to come first. It's going to set the table for us, but it's going to be temporary until Mashiach ben David is going to come and establish the permanent kingdom, the Malchus based David, amongst the Jewish people. There's this pattern that Yosef represents the going out and being able to set things up, being out there in the world where it's a dangerous place to be spiritually. And then Yehuda can come and set up his base medrash. He can set up his permanent action of the avodas pnim. Not only do we see Yosef with the ability to maintain himself in a foreign land, but he also has the ability to even do more than that. Let's see source number 9. The Torah describes, this was in 2 weeks ago's Parsha, when Yaakov was still living with his uncle Lavan, and he decides, when is it time to go back home? Vayehi kasher yolda Rachel es Yosef. When does Yaakov say, I'm ready to go home and confront my brother Esav? Only when Yosef is born. So the Gemara asks, my shnaki is Yalid Yosef. Why was it only after Yosef is born that all of a sudden Yaakov says, I'm ready to go home and face my brother Esav? So the Gemara says, Ra Yaakov Avinu she'ein zaro shel Esav nimsar elu biad zaro shel Yosef. He saw Esav would only be conquered by the children of Yosef. That was going to be the one who has, not Yehuda, not any of the others are going to be able to take down Esav. It's Yosef's force, not just to survive in a foreign land, but to conquer and be on top or in charge and be able to overcome others. As the pasuk in Ovadia says, "V'haya beis Yaakov eish," the house of Yaakov will be fire, beis Yosef lehava, and Yosef will be the flame, and beis Esav will be the straw. And as the Medrash says, I didn't quote the whole thing in front of you, a fire on its own is just here. It's the flame that takes it out there. Yaakov sees, now that Yosef is born, he's the flame that can go out and reach Esav. I'm ready to go home and face Esav when I have this power. Contrast that with the Medrash that says, Bizman shel kolo shel Yaakov matzui bebate knesios, when the voice of Yaakov is found in shul, Ein hayadayim of Yad Esav sholtos, and the hands of Esav are not able to overpower us. Meaning, they can't overpower us in our shuls if this voice of Yaakov is heard. If the sound of Torah and Tefillah is heard, we're protected. But to go out and conquer Esav, that's the power of Yosef. Only Yosef can go out there and do that. It's not surprising, of course, and when we think about the Purim story, it's Hanukkah now, when we think about the Purim story, who is the one who's out there fighting Amalek? Mordechai, who's an Ish Yemini, from the children of Binyamin. Binyamin, Yosef, children of Rachel. That's the strength to be in a foreign land and be able to overpower there comes from the children of Rachel. That's a Binyamin descendant who's the hero of the Purim story. Okay, interesting. There's just one other interesting source, which I didn't, was working on this. In Parshas Miketz, the Torah tells us that in the second year of the famine, Vatir of Kol Eretz Mitzrayim, everybody is starving. There's no food left. Vayitzako emel Paro lolochem. Everybody comes to Paro asking for bread. Vayomer Paro lechom Mitzrayim. Go to Yosef, and whatever he says, do. So Rashi quotes from the Medrash, why is there no food? Yosef had been telling them for 7 years already, store up all your grain, get everything ready. Famine is coming. How could it be in the second year nobody has any food, and Yosef does? So Rashi quotes the Medrash. They came to Sheher Kiva Tvu Asam. All of their grain rotted. All of the Egyptian grain they had prepared, it all went bad, except for Yosef's. So they came to Yosef and they said, feed us. And Yosef said, Shiyimolu, you all have to have a bris milah. All the Egyptians ran to Paro. They said, this is crazy. Did you hear what he wants us to do? We're starving. We need food. He has it. He wants us to have a bris milah, Paro. So Paro says, listen, what should I tell you? Everything this man says has happened so far. His grain stayed. All your grain rotted. If the man says have a bris milah, you need to do a bris milah. Says the Medrash, they all do a bris milah, and Yosef gives them to eat. There's much to talk about on that Medrash. The point that I just want to bring up as far as our point is, Yosef is the force in Mitzrayim who imposes his will on the Egyptians, not just he's Yosef who maintains his righteousness in the same righteousness in his father's house, he maintains it in Mitzrayim. He then imposes his will on the Egyptians and has them all doing bris milah, trying to raise up their spiritual stature, getting everything ready for his family to come down, so that, or they're already there at the time, so that whatever, all the different reasons the Chazal describe this. I just want to bring out the point that he is now influencing the Egyptians in their way, in their home. That's the power of a Yosef to be out there. Now, again, as we've discussed in our own lives, we're so familiar with these different forces amongst the Jewish people. Those who need to be in their own world, need to be in a world of spiritual cocoon in order to maintain themselves, and they thrive in that. And there are those who are able to be out there and thrive in that and influence in the world around them. It's different kochos, different strengths amongst the Jewish people. Yaakov takes on both. His first wife Leah is now his inner service, the inside base of Medrash. His second wife Rachel now has children, Yosef and Binyamin, who are going to be the ones out there preparing the way, first conquering the land, getting it ready for the permanence of Klal Yisrael, setting up the first Mishkan, and all the different examples that we have discussed. That brings us to source number 11. One of the problems that the Torah addresses or discusses or reveals to us about this tension between the brothers comes in the very beginning of our Parsha. Eila told us Yaakov, Yosef. Here are the generations of Yaakov. It was Yosef. He was 17 years old. He was Roya Esachav Batzon. He was shepherding his brothers. Vuhu Na'ar. And he was like a lad. He was a young man. With Bnei Bilha and Bnei Zilpa, and he would bring an evil report to their father. And again, a lot to talk about the idea that, as Rashi notes, that the Torah says, Eila told us Yaakov, and who was his primary child, so to speak, it was Yosef. They shared a lot of things in common. He brings this evil report. But let's just focus now on who's a Na'ar. What does it mean that he was a Na'ar? He was a lad. Rashi says, Shaya osem ma'aseh na'aros. He would do childish type things. What were the childish things that he would do?
Nisakin Bisa'aro, you play with his hair, Mimashmesh Be'enav, and with his eyes, Kadeshi and Nira Yafet, that he should look beautiful. One of the only times we find numerous times that the Torah describes the women as beautiful, and Yosef is going to be described as a Yifas To'ar. In the next week's Parsha, we're going to see him in Mitzrayim, that the women would climb the walls to look at him. He was so beautiful. And here he's playing with his hair and his eyes to beautify himself. And it's described as a ma'as and na'aris. The Rosh Yeshiva understood, what does it mean when we describe beauty is an external trait that often reflects an inner quality. But to say about Yosef that he was beautiful fits what he is, which is the quality, the power, the koach, to be outside the walls of the Beis HaMedrash. Inside the Beis HaMedrash, you don't need external beauty. You're focusing on learning, on davening, that's your avoda. But if you're out there, so we all know, you got to present yourself, you got to look right. If you're going to be out there in the world, and you're going to be a conqueror, and you're going to be a manipulator, you're going to be dominant force out there, so the quality that you need is a very different quality than what you need inside the Beis HaMedrash, inside shul. And Yosef, as a young man of 17, has that quality of the external beauty, which he's going to need as he goes out there into the world, and he's playing with his hair and with his eyes. I want to just explain what the Rosh Yeshiva explains here with the mashal. This is not his, this is mine. We're very familiar with the scenario in which a person, a young man or young woman, becomes extremely successful in life. Very, very, very successful business, becomes very wealthy, and does all sorts of amazing things. And if you go back to that person's high school classmates or teachers, and you say, yeah, you see what happened? And they'll say, like, we can't believe it. We can't believe it. That student was a disaster in high school. We couldn't get them to do anything. We couldn't get them to study, to sit still. And it's not surprising, because the traits that you need to succeed in high school are a certain submissive trait to sit in your seat and sit with your back straight and listen to the teacher and take notes. It's a wonderful trait if you have that. It's great for high school, but that's not necessarily the greatest of traits that are going to be out there in the world of business. And very often, those kids, we just got to get them through high school and then let them fly, let them flourish. Give them a world in which they don't have to sit at a desk for 8 hours a day. They don't have to memorize facts. Let them be creative. Let them do their thing. Let them be with people. The fact that they didn't succeed in high school has no bearing on their ability to succeed in life, because the qualities that you need are not the same. But when they're in high school, they're a mess. I use it as a mashal, as a parable. What is Yosef's trait that we've seen over and over again? Yosef's trait is the ability to keep the same righteousness in his father's home as when he's in Mitzrayim, when he becomes the king. Yosef is the ability to attack Esav on Esav's terms. Yosef has the ability to get the Egyptians to do a bris milah. Can you imagine what Yosef, those are his powers, those are his qualities. Can you imagine what it was like for him as a 17-year-old in his father's house? None of these things are relevant yet. He's inside the walls of the Beis HaMedrash. He's inside his father's house. He's this young boy bursting with energy of a 17-year-old, and he's not yet able to express what he's destined to become. The brothers see that, and they see this one is different. Now remember, the brothers have watched this happen for 3 generations already. There was Yishmael, and there was Yitzchak, and what happened to Yishmael? He's out. He's a problem. The line is going to continue through Yitzchak. Yitzchak has 2 children, Esav and Yaakov. What happens to Esav? Esav is, he's not in. He's out. Do we get rid of Esav? And the line continues through Yaakov. Yaakov has a number of children, and Yosef, we've seen this story before. Yosef is different. Yosef is not acting like the rest of us. Yosef is busy with his hair and with his eyes. In our terminology, getting ready for his life's mission to be out there. But he hasn't yet been able to do so. He's still in his father's home. He's 17 years old, bursting with energy. And his brothers misread what they see in him as very different, not fit. Remember, all of the brothers are Leah children. all of the brothers are Leah children or the maidservants, and they don't have that same status yet as the first 6. Yosef and Binyamin are the babies. Binyamin's even younger than Yosef. So the 6 brothers of Leah, who are of a certain approach, they all see Yosef as off and as a threat. And they see, this is the pattern. We have to cut out Yishmael. Esav is out. Looks like we're doing it again. And who's the threat, so to speak? It's this kid Yosef. Look at what he's doing. So they decide he's out. We're going to sell him. What do they buy? The Torah says they sold him for 20 pieces of silver. And they buy shoes. Let's take a look at shoes. We find shoes a couple of times in the Chumash. We find them in the beginning of Sefer Shmos when Moshe meets up with Hashem for the very first time. Al tikrav halom. Hashem says to Moshe, don't come any further. Shal na'alecha me'al raglecha. Take your shoes off. Ki hamakom asher ata omed alav admas kodesh. Where you're standing is sanctified. You can't wear shoes in a sanctified place. Here, it's just, you're directly on the ground, no shoes when you stand in a place of sanctity. As the Ramban explains, Ki niskadesh kol hahar, the entire mountain was sanctified, beredus hashchina al rosh hahar, vine kulo kadosh v'asur b'ne'ilas hasandal. You can't wear shoes in a sanctified place. V'chein hakohanim lo shimshu b'mikdash ela yechefim. In the Beis Hamikdash, the Kohanim were also barefoot. Couldn't wear shoes because in a holy place, you don't wear shoes. We similarly find that same idea in Yehoshua. Hashem tells Yehoshua, Shal na'alecha me'al raglecha ki hamakom asher ata omed alav kodeshu. You can't wear your shoes. There's a certain sanctity and shoes are inappropriate. I'd like to suggest, the Rosh Yeshiva explains this in a little different way. This is the first time that I'm saying something that's not entirely his. This is a little bit my thought based on everything that he has said, but this is not quite the way that he says it. We make a bracha every single morning. The bracha that we make is Asher Abaruch Adonai Melech Olam She'asa Li Kol Tzarki. We thank Hashem, you have given me all of my needs. She'asa Li Kol Tzarki. Now it's in a list of 15 brachas, Birchas HaShachar, the morning brachas. It's one after another. We thank Hashem for all of the various things that he does. Now really, we're supposed to make each one of those brachas at a specific time in the morning as we wake up and get ourselves up and out of bed and dressed. Each step that we take, we should make a bracha to thank Hashem for our ability to take that next step. And the Shulchan Aruch actually writes, that's what was originally done. Every step of the way, you would make a bracha. So for example, in source 15, Kishalovish, when you get dressed, Yivarech, Malbish Arumim, you clothe the naked. As you put on your clothing, you should be making a bracha. Thank you for allowing me and giving me clothing. As you open up your eyes and wash away whatever you need to, you should make a bracha. Who gives sight to the blind. I have the ability to see. Right then and then, as you open up your eyes in the morning, you should make the bracha of I can see. When you sit up, Matir Asurim, you release the confined. I'm no longer confined to my bed. I'm able to get up. I should make a bracha in thanks to Hashem. Matir Asurim, I can get out of bed. Kishizokev, when you stand up straight, Yevarech Zokev Kifufim, you straighten up the bent. Thank you for allowing me to stand up. Kishianiach Raglav Ba'aretz, when you put your feet onto the ground off of your bed, Yevarech Roka Ha'aretz Al Hamayim, that you've put solid earth onto the waters. That when you create look, I can stand, I have what to stand upon. Kishinoi Al Mina Alav, when you put your shoes on, Yevarech She'asa Li Kol Tzarki, that you have provided for me everything. So every step of the way in our morning routine should get a bracha. Again, we make these brachas all together when we get to shul. But each step of the way really has its own bracha of thanks and gratitude for Hashem. What's the bracha we make on shoes? Very interesting bracha. She'asa li kol tzarki. You have provided me with everything that I need. Why are shoes that I make the bracha, you've given me everything. It should be a specific bracha, just like everything else. Make a bracha. You gave me shoes. Why? You gave me everything. Says the Avudraham in his commentary to the Siddur, Hata'am lebracha zu, because shekol zman shehu yochev, every moment that you're barefoot, eino yochol lotzeis, you can't go out v'la asos tzrachav and do your needs, v'tzorchei beso, and then fulfill the needs of your home. Because you're barefoot. You can't walk with your head up, looking out, conquering the world if you have to look it down and make sure you don't step on a sharp rock or a shard of glass. And what are you walking over? Shoes give us the ability to walk without paying attention to what we're walking on. The protection, the hard leather underneath our feet makes us conquerors, allows us to fight wars. In our day and age, you can go to work because I don't have to worry about how I'm going to get there, when I'm going to step on. I can fulfill my tzrochim v'tzrochei beso. So I make the bracha when I put on my shoes. You've provided me with everything, because it's through my shoes that I can go out and actually do and accomplish everything. With this, Chevra, I think we could tie this all together. It's an amazing thing. The brothers see in Yosef something different. They see he's off. Something is wrong. He's not part of us. He's telling us dreams about ruling over us. He's supposed to be on our team, and he's giving us dreams that he's going to be the king, and he's ruling, and he's tattletaling on us. He's following the pattern. He's out, playing with his hair and his eyes. So they decided that he's out of the equation. So they needed to get rid of him. But the brothers recognized that he represents a koach that they don't have. What's the koach of Yosef? Yosef is the koach of being able to be in Mitzrayim and maintain your righteousness, to be in Mitzrayim and get the Egyptians to do a bris milah, to be the one like a Yehoshua to conquer the land, to be the one to be Mashiach ben Yosef, who's going to come in and get everything ready, to be the one to prepare the land of Goshen so that Yehuda can come instead of the Beis Medrash. Yosef is a koach, and if he's out, who's going to do that? We're all children of Leah, and we're getting rid of Yosef because he's opting out, like they thought, like Esav did. Well, if he opts out, who's going to take over that koach? So what do? They buy shoes, because shoes represent the ability to go out. The brothers didn't have shoes until now. They didn't need shoes until now. Until now, they are the inside Beis HaMedrash people. They're serving inside, learning and davening. And now they say, Yosef is out. Well, guess what? If Yosef is out, somebody else has to step up. And now, for the first time, what do they purchase with the sale of Yosef as they get rid of that strength, that koach in Klal Yisrael? They buy shoes. It's a brilliant insight from Chazal that that's what they needed as they sell Yosef, and assuming they're never going to see him again. They need shoes, and all that it represents of them saying, we now need to take on this trait, this quality of being able to be out there and manipulate. That was the original. We'll conclude with the original Medrash. Yosef says, you guys don't understand. I am this strength. He said, your sheaves were all surrounding me. Ani kones v'atem konsim. I gather grain and you do. Mine remains and yours rots. This is my strength. This is my koach. Remember, the original pasuk says, where is this dream taking place? The Torah adds a detail. Here's the pasuk again. The Torah adds the detail. Where is this dream of the sheaves? It's in the middle of the field. The same language. What was Esav again? An ish hasadeh. That koach that Yaakov then takes, he now has with his wife Rachel, gives down to Yosef. Yosef says, I'm gathering the sheaves bitoch hasadeh, and mine remain. This is my ability to be able to do so. If you try your hands on this, it's not your strength. This is for me to do. It's going to remain. The brothers misunderstand him in his young age at 17, who hasn't yet a chance to flourish with his talents in the place where they can. He's still stuck at home, where his ability is going to flourish outside of home. They mistook all of his traits and sell him and say, now that we got rid of him, we need shoes. We need the ability to go out there. Of course, as the divine scheme of things works itself out, Yosef is still part of Klal Yisrael. He's simply getting everything ready in Mitzrayim for the Jews to come down so that Yehuda can come and set up his Beis Medrash, so that the children of Yosef can be the ones to lead the path, be the ones out there in the world who are the ones who are able to sustain themselves in a world of spiritual impurity and maintain themselves and even influence that. Those are the strengths of Yosef. and then the ability to be inside and build from within, that all comes from the children of Leah, represented by Yehuda. And this tension between Yehuda and Yosef finds itself in many different places. We find throughout Chazal and throughout Tanakh this tension, and it starts here in this week's Parsha and then continues to develop throughout, and I'm sure we'll have other opportunities to address it. Those are the thoughts on this idea that's been developed over a couple of weeks. Yosef, Yehuda, Yaakov, and Esav, Rachel, and Leah, as they manifest themselves off for a pair of shoes they sold Yosef. I wish you all a wonderful Hanukkah, a great Shabbos, and we're not going to learn actually for the next couple. I'm not going to be here around for the next couple of weeks. I will follow your emails for the next time we get together, but we'll be off for a couple of weeks from now, a little winter break.
Sure.